Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in this press conference. We know that a lot of you have a lot of things to do as well. It's the final stretch here at COP, and we're so happy that you're joining us today as we talk about the different things that we are all of the things that we are looking at in Southeast Asia and the things that we want to demand from the COP presidency as well. So thank you again for joining us in this press con. I'll be joined by three prolific speakers, and you can ask them questions after. But before anything else, I'd like to give them the floor to speak. The first one would be our colleague from the Climate Action Network, Southeast Asia. Nithi, go ahead.
Thanks, Brianna. As we enter the final stretch of the negotiations, the first thing I'd like to say is that the countries of G77 and China must stand strong on the demand for at least $1 trillion in climate finance in the form of public finance and grants. And also with reference to today being the Oceans Day, as we are all from Southeast Asia, just like to say that Southeast Asia accounts for 34% of the global coral reef population, the largest contribution of any regional bloc. It contributes $11 billion directly to overall Southeast Asia economy. Now, coral reefs, the coral economy, the coral reefs can absorb up to 97% of a wave's energy, making them effective coastline buffers. And it is estimated they have prevented the loss of $19 billion in infrastructure damage in Southeast Asia. Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines account for over 90% of reefs in Southeast Asia, and 85% of these reefs in these three countries are threatened. So this is an urgent issue which needs to be addressed. And we have them also further threatened by fossil gas expansion in the Verde Islands Passage, which I think one of the other speakers will be touching. Now, the thing about Southeast Asia is that it's a region highly vulnerable to climate risks. In the study up to 2000, it showed that 3 of the top 10 countries in the world vulnerable to climate risk are in Southeast Asia. Yet, I mean, on the positive side, 9 of the 10 countries have declared net zero emissions targets, 7 of them by 2050. So there is an intention to decarbonize. Yet, the region is experiencing a fossil fuel expansion, a fossil fuel boom. So there is no coherence there, and also dangerous trends with importing carbon dioxide emissions from Japan and Korea in the form of carbon capture and storage projects, and considering fossil gas as a transition fuel. This is a false solution as the cost of renewables is coming down and it can effectively act as a obstacle to renewable energy implementation. Just like to say that the region is renewable energy rich, and Philippines and Vietnam, for a start, can go to 100% renewable energy. So there is a need for decarbonization in line with the net zero emissions pledges and a phase out of fossil fuels. And decarbonization must take place with just energy transition, with gender at the core of the transition. So this is basically aligning with principles of distributive justice, making sure everyone gets a share of the benefits of the transition to the green economy, and restorative justice, addressing past injustices, as well as procedural justice, which is inclusivity, making sure everyone gets a seat at the table and where their voices are heard. So by implementing just energy transition, it provides energy security without having to rely on external sources for fossil fuels, especially those countries which import. And it also provides a pathway to transition away for those oil-producing countries in the region. And this will bring benefits to the country in the terms of energy security, because they don't have to import fossil fuels, and also just transition, which is enabling greater participation of the people in the new green economy. And this will also lead to less demand for the use of our forests in terms of carbon offsetting projects or removing the forests for the sake of the economy. So with that, just energy transition is central to Southeast Asia. It can bring about energy benefits as well. It can bring about economic benefits as well as protection of nature.
Thank you so much, Niti. It's very important to actually highlight that in Southeast Asia, one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, the ongoing expansion of fossil fuels and other destructive activities is decimating critical ecosystems. And we're here to spotlight an issue that cannot wait, the intertwined crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change. And with that, we call on our colleague Marta Vergara of Ceed to talk about this pressing issue.
Thank you all for being here today. Today is World Fisheries Day and Oceans Day at COP29. And as negotiations go on for hours before the scheduled end of COP29, the reality on the ground in Southeast Asia tells a devastating story of environmental destruction that continues to this day. And as we fight for our goal, our region is being carved up and sold off to fossil fuel interests. In Southeast Asia, we are witnessing an unprecedented expansion of fossil fuel infrastructures. Our region has now become one of the world's largest coal expansionists. And as we are being pushed toward a massive gas build-out that will lock us into a fossil fuel dependency for decades to come. Even as we pilot early coal retirement programs that the global north praised as progress, the reality is that coal development hasn't stopped. Instead, it is accelerating. Vietnam and the Philippines alone account for 62% of planned gas capacity in the region, a staggering 84.6 gigawatts. The Mekong Delta, one of our precious ecosystems, will host 66% of Vietnam's planned gas capacity. In the Philippines, the Verde Island Passage has now become the ground zero for fossil gas expansion, with 5 existing plants, 10 more in the pipeline, and multiple LNG terminals either operating or under construction. This isn't development. This is exploitation under the guise of energy security. But the real cost of this expansion goes beyond emissions as the Coral Triangle is under siege. This rich marine region, just covering 1.5% of the world's oceans, hosts 76% of coral species and sustains more than 370 million people. The scale of destruction is staggering. 24% of coral habitats, 37% of mangroves, and 22% of seagrass beds are now covered by oil and gas blocks. Over 100 oil and gas blocks, offshore oil and gas blocks, operate in these waters, with 450 more under exploration. If these planned developments proceed, fossil fuel operations would directly impact 16% of the Coral Triangle's critical habitats, an area larger than the combined landmass of Indonesia. The Verde Island Passage in the Philippines, rightfully called the Amazon of the oceans, is a home to 300 species of corals and 1,700 species of fish. Millions of residents across the 5 provinces in the Philippines depend on these waters for their survival. Yet we are watching this irreplaceable marine corridor We are watching this irreplaceable marine corridor be sacrificed for fossil fuel profits. We call on the global North nations to stop continuing fossil fuel expansion in Southeast Asia and in other parts of the world. We also stand in solidarity with civil society organizations and vulnerable nations in demanding the delivery of at least $1.3 trillion in climate finance in a just and equitable manner. We need public grants, not debt-inducing loans. We demand the immediate cancellation of all planned gas and oil developments, as well as all new coal and gas-fired power plants in our regions. With the abundance of renewable energy in the Southeast Asia, this isn't impossible. But we need historical polluters to deliver finance they owe to the Global South. We call for the establishment of fossil fuel-free zones in critical biodiversity hotspots, including the Mekong Delta, the Coral Triangle, and at its heart, the Verde Island Passage, including restrictions of financing by financial institutions to fossil fuel projects in this area. The time for rhetoric is over. The global North must take its historical responsibility and should act now. Our communities, our biodiversity, and our future should not let this another COP pass without meaningful progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. For those of you who have just joined us, happy World Fisheries Day. Today we spotlight on the critical intersections of climate, biodiversity, and the livelihoods that depends on our oceans. So thank you for being here with us. It's clear from all of our speakers that the stakes could not be higher for Southeast Asia's communities and ecosystems. And to continue this discussion, let's hear from Vince of World Animal Protection, who will delve into the critical link between food systems, climate change, and decarbonization. Vince, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to greet everybody happy Nature, Biodiversity, and Oceans and Coastal Zones Day. But on the other hand, I cannot be that really optimistic and happy because as we are speaking right now in the middle of COP29 conference, the Global South, particularly Southeast Asia, were home to a lot of, globally insecure globally food insecure communities that's being, targeted by destructive and sustainable developments, are now going to receive a lot of fossil fuel or greenhouse gas intensive development. On the other hand, because of these developments in the Global South, as you can see here, this is also an expression that in the Global South right now, what you're seeing here is an increasing movement, an intersectional movement of people, me coming from animal welfare organization, coming from environmental groups, from grassroots communities, seeing and uniting against, a destructive path towards a climate crisis. So that is why we are here. We are proud. World Animal Protection is lending that voice. We wanted to amplify that one. I'll go back to, for me, it's important, the Verde Island Passage, Southeast Asia. We are, as mentioned earlier, we are important in terms of sources for animal protein security, not just in the region, but globally. But this is now under threat by oil and gas expansion. Before even talking about oil and gas projects in this region is actually, the oceans in this region is actually already being devastated. One, by overfishing, by industrial model of fishing. It is extracting a lot of resources that even people from the coastal communities can no longer eat or afford the very fish that's thriving in their coastal areas. And now we have this oil and gas. So this is what we call a very deadly mix, a deadly cocktail of oil and gas plus overfishing. So this will further exacerbate the problem in the Global South. And it's quite ironic because that is not what we are talking about, the direction that we are going to. It will pull us back from the goals and targets of the Paris Agreement. Greenhouse gas emission coming from fossil fuel and then industrial fishing and overfishing will basically put us in the brink of danger. Basically, these ecosystems are essential to regional and global biodiversity. They are, under siege from relentless overfishing to the point of being genocidal against the very people that's producing our food. So we at World Animal Protection, we basically call for a just transition, moving away from fossil fuels. I'm going to re-echo what others are saying. Moving away from fossil fuels, destructive food production systems, both on land and water. This very industrial agriculture model is reliant on petrochemicals. So can you just look at how we are in all fronts, we are being attacked by a lot of climate-causing greenhouse gases. The expansion of this oil and gas and the industrial food and agriculture production model in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, it's not only driving climate change by releasing massive carbon emissions, but further devastating the livelihoods of millions. Again, on this pivotal day, we stress that the interconnectedness of the issues that we are fighting for against oil and gas, food security, climate actions are basically interconnected. We at World Animal Protection, we have this white paper that we are proposing to guide governments the just transition from industrial animal production to equitable, humane, and sustainable food systems. This very industrial animal agriculture model that's very reliant on oil and gas and fossil fuel. I'm sure some of those gases that goes into Verde Island Passage or any other parts of Southeast Asia will also fuel the expansion of industrial animal production. So it's being co-created by 50 global contributors. It basically provides a roadmap. So there is no excuse for governments here that's present here or even to the governments back at home that they don't have anything else or they don't know what they're going to do, because we are not just this roadmap, but there's a lot of initiatives already being done. So again, the Verde Island Passage is part of the Coral Triangle. It's a global epicenter of marine biodiversity. It's being pushed to the brink further, endangering ecosystems, the animals in them, and the communities that have relied on that area. If you can recall, we are going to see a lot of disasters if this developmental direction continues. For example, I think it would be good for us to highlight the recent oil spill that happened in Verde Island Passage because of the operations of the gas and oil in that area. That oil spill basically further destroys the mangroves in the areas and the coral ecosystems were basically wiped out. So can you just imagine people not even getting money from fossil fuel are now being deprived further of their livelihood. So again, today, our urgent call that we need to act together. We need to block all of these developments. We need to reverse the kind of direction where we are going. We need to go towards transitioning towards a humane and sustainable system in the future, and the direction of the industries and some of our government cohorts are basically going against the very future that's basically going to sustain all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a bit of time for questions, so we now open the floor for everyone who wants to ask our panelists questions. Please state your name and organization before asking your questions. Okay, it seems like everyone's still gathering their thoughts, so let me start with my own question for our panelists. You've talked about demands and also what needs to be done, but what do you think are immediate actions that ASEAN countries can take to balance the need for energy security and the urgent call to protect biodiversity and the transition away from fossil fuels? Maybe, Nithi, you can start.
The first thing the countries need to realize is that they have made a pledge to decarbonize by 2050. And they need to take it seriously and come up with a plan, a roadmap to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And this means decarbonizing. And decarbonizing means phasing out of fossil fuels. For the oil and gas producing nations in the region, it's a phase out based on fair share and equity, and there are targets already given by the year by which these countries should phase out fossil fuel. Studies have already been done, taking into account fair share and equity. The other thing is also we've got to harness our rich renewable energy sources and solutions and stop this boom which is going on in oil and gas and coal production, which is going to lock us into the fossil fuel infrastructure for the next 30 to 40 years. And this will then become an obstacle for implementing renewable energy solutions. So we've got to stop this expansion and stop thinking that we can continue with business as usual as long, and then do things like carbon capture and storage and ammonia co-firing and hydrogen. These are all false solutions, and these are all expensive solutions. Even nuclear is coming into the conversation now. All this should stop, and the solution is for governments in the region to have extensive stakeholder consultations with, consultation with the different stakeholders, including civil society, in charting an alternate vision for the region where we can achieve our net zero emissions targets in a way which harnesses the low-hanging fruit of energy efficiency, energy conservation, renewable energy, and protecting our forests as the way to go forward.
Thank you, Nithi. In the interest of time, we still have 5 minutes. I'd like to ask Martha, we've heard that the Coral Triangle is under increasing pressure from fossil fuel expansion. In the same vein, what do you think are some policies or mechanisms or some demands that needs to be done immediately?
I would say one of the immediate actions that we can do right now within the walls of this stadium is to demand the global north to take their historical responsibility and support our transition to renewable energy. Our clean ambition, our goals, our ambitions are high, but we cannot achieve them while being strangled by climate debt and false promises. And once we go back to our countries, and I echo what Nithi has said, our renewable energy potentials are very high. And once we continue the business as usual, definitely the Coral Triangle, as I said earlier, the Coral Triangle will be affected. 16% of this will be affected. In the Verde Island Passage, fish catches are already declining. And the provinces in this marine corridor provide for 1/4 of the fish catch for the entire Philippines. And this is critical, especially for us in the Philippines, because fishes are our number one source of protein because they're accessible and they're cheaper. So that's just one of the many implications if we don't stop fossil fuel expansion in the region.
So we've heard about protein consumption. Maybe for Vince, how can food systems in Southeast Asia adapt to this dual challenge of climate change and biodiversity loss while ensuring food security for our vulnerable communities?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's important for us to really identify and understand the intersections between the growth of fossil fuel and at the same time the expansion of industrial animal agriculture, because industrial animal agriculture is really carbon intensive by nature, even though they are going to, again, they're going to talk about fall solutions, they're going to cut down their methane gases, but at the same time, it will not, it will just maintain the very system that's very destructive. When we talk about transitioning, just transition in the context of fossil fuel, we also need to take into account that the just transition, we also need to look at transitioning away from industrial animal agricultural food systems. So that needs to happen side by side, hand in hand, and cannot happen separately. So we need to talk about, because we need to talk about the smallholder farmers, the fishers, the impacted communities, and at the same time, in order also to transition towards a humane, sustainable, and equitable food system, that kind of food systems needs basically an important finance, which this scope is basically being packaged and promoted as a finance scope. But until now, I think that finance is nowhere to be found, and I think that finance is not there to enable to transition to make sure that the communities are there to transition towards the very future that is low carbon and very sustainable.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. So thank you for all of your time for being part of this important conversation. Let's continue to push for meaningful action to protect our biodiversity communities and our future. Again, happy World Fisheries Day. It's Biodiversity Day at COP as well. So let's continue advocating for our oceans, the biodiversity they sustain, and the communities that depend on them. Thank you very much for joining us.